I'm Scott Allen Miller. It's the 25th of July, 2023. This is my vlog of daily life living in Leon, Nicaragua, and today we're going to be tackling the question that keeps coming up, and everyone wants to know the current answers, so we have to answer it every so often, is what is the situation with bringing drones into Nicaragua? We're also going to really quickly talk about cameras and video equipment as well, and all of that we're going to get to right after the bump. First things first, a little housekeeping. It is the 25th, which means you're seeing this on the 1st of August. If you're seeing this in the morning and you're in Nicaragua, be aware today is Managua's Ipico. So if you're in the area, head out to Managua and go see the horsies as they parade through the streets. That is my plan, to be there filming for you guys. So hopefully, if you're there, look for me, but it's a big city, so it'll be hard to track me down. It's not like seeing me in Nagarrote or something like that, but that is where we plan to be. Before we get to drones, which is the big topic, a lot of people keep asking about cameras, and I see this, certainly I see it more on Reddit than I see it in our community here, because we've posted about it previously, but it's just worth mentioning really quickly. People ask, can you bring cameras into the country? How much are you going to be taxed? What is the limitation? How many do you get? Here's the answer. Cameras, by executive decree, are sacrosanct coming into Nicaragua. There is no tax, there may not be a tax. They cannot be restricted. The type of camera does not matter. Cameras are allowed under all circumstances. That is the written words of the law. They explain why this is for tourism and bird watching and seeing the beauty of the country and important little things like that that we understand to be reasons of tourism. But bottom line is there is no limitations on cameras. And there's a lot of people who want to make the system sound bad, or they have some experiences from long ago. This is a relatively recent law in the last few months that they came out with this protective law that cameras are absolutely not to be touched at the border controls. Because it used to be that you could tax certain types of cinema equipment. There was a brief couple of hours, literally hours, in which they expanded cinema equipment to include some things that were used in cinemas but were also used by normal people, and that is what triggered the protection law. And they're like, you know what, we're not making any taxes on the cinema stuff. No one's making movies here on any scale, but we are making people worried about bringing in cameras, so we got to stop this. And so they just did. All cameras are allowed, period. But I have a GoPro. Yes, that's allowed. But it's a cinema cam. Nope, that's allowed. But it's film. It's allowed. Digital film, big cameras, camera equipment, lights, all that stuff, that's allowed. No problems whatsoever. It doesn't matter what question you're about to ask, it's allowed. Now, does that mean that no corrupt person, no misinformed person ever won't make a mistake? No, it could happen in theory, but that is someone not obeying the law. And they can get in quite a bit of trouble for that, because this is not like some law that's been on the books for a bunch of time and someone just gets it wrong. This is a modern presidential decree that went directly to the border control agents and said you may not curtail the importation of cameras with people crossing the border under any circumstances, period. There wasn't any like unless, there wasn't any ifs or buts. It wasn't like that. It was you may not do this. And so if you run into that problem, bring that up at the border, ask for someone more senior and say, I am aware that there is a executive order that these are allowed and may not be taxed. What's going on, right? Because if they know you know that law, they know they're in a lot of trouble, right? When your lawyer contacts Border Control and says, hey, I heard you confiscated a camera, they're in it deep, because it's one thing to like, get the law wrong. It's another thing to violate an executive order that went directly to them. This is not like a general law. This was a order to them. They don't get very many of those. So this is a really big deal. And there's no reasonable excuse that anybody at the border isn't aware of that, because they were sent a letter and it was copied to the nation so that everybody saw it. And the executive office in the government is like, we are absolutely permitting all cameras, period. Everyone knows, specifically so that the border control couldn't act like they didn't know. So the amount that is protected is extreme. And I know lots of people bringing in cameras, both before, that was not a problem in the past, but there was more possibility of it being a problem in the past. And I know people bringing them in now, and I've never heard of someone having a problem. And I certainly bring a lot of cameras and have no problems. I get other things cause me problems, but not my cameras. All right, now the real question, the thing you've all been asking and everybody keeps asking and really wants to know, and the reason I bring it up is because it was asked a bit on Reddit, which I do try to watch, but I want to answer it, and then I want to talk about a little bit, so stick with it. I'm going to get the answer to you pretty quickly, but then there's this wacky conspiracy theory, and I've heard this more than once, so I want to talk about just how wacky this is, because it's one of those things that Americans repeat, and they don't understand in Nicaragua, or the world, apparently, and or finances, money in general, and it gets pretty wild. So I think that's going to be entertaining, just how crazy that is. But, okay, are drones allowed in Nicaragua? We got the answer real quick for you. No, they are not. They are simply not allowed. And again, you can do a whole bunch of ifs, buts, but no, they are not allowed. You're not allowed to have equipment that will fly cameras around. If you removed the camera from it, the camera can be brought in, no question. It's the drone portion that you're not allowed to have. So it's not that the camera's restricted, it's the thing the camera's in. Just take it out, and if you want to have a drone camera that you carry around, that won't be a problem. It'd be weird and expensive, but you can do that. But no, drones are not allowed. It's worth noting, and this does not apply to anyone on this channel. No one who is asking this question, no one who's wondering about drones will this ever apply to. Are there ways to legally get a drone into the country? Yes. Does it apply to you? Absolutely not. Never. Absolutely not. No. But if you're a large company, if you're well connected, if you have resources and lawyers and you know, are very responsible and have worked in the country for a long time and can make a really good case as to why you need a camera, for example, that flies. For example, you have large agricultural holdings and you need to monitor wildlife in it, or check on the infrared sensors for crop nutrition, right? Which is a real thing. You use infrared cameras and you look at large crop areas to determine where you have deficient soil. That's real and it's useful, and that's an argument you can make to the government to get permission to have a drone. It's going to be expensive. It's going to need to be purpose designed. There's a lot of requirements, but it can be done. And I know of people who have worked with companies who've done it and got a drone. You can do it, right? But you have to be legit. You cannot be a tourist, and everybody thinks they're the exception. I can't believe how often, living in Nicaragua, everyone thinks, while being the most obvious non-exception, that they're the exception to everything, right? I'm going to do the exact investment that everyone does. I'll be the exception to it making money. You can't possibly be talking about me. I'm going to talk to exactly the real estate agent everybody is mentioning. I'm just going to be sure that they can't be, I must have found the exception. No, you found the person we're talking about. Every case. I just want to be a tourist with a drone. I must be the exception. No, you're not. You're the case they're talking about not allowing in. There's no way you're going to be an exception to the drone law, period. What typically happens? If you get caught with a drone, normally it's going to be confiscated. Are you going to get it back? Almost certainly not. Is it possible? Yes, there's some possibility. I guarantee someone has gotten their drone back, but in general, no, it is gone. It is not their responsibility to give it back to you. It is your responsibility not to bring it to the border. It is very public knowledge that drones are not allowed here. They expect you to look that up before you come, and you're not going to get in trouble if you have it at the border and properly declare it like you're supposed to, but you are pretty much guaranteed to lose it permanently. You might get lucky, maybe you lose it temporarily, but assume that if you try it at the border and they find out about it, that you're not getting it back. It's just how it is. If you get over the border with it, chances are it'll just get confiscated in country. And they don't tend to go around looking for them because there aren't very many. You almost never see them flying. I've only seen 2 or 3 fly the entire time we've been here. And when I have seen them flying, they're often at government events, right? Like large things, like huge baseball games, they'll fly them to film the crowd. So, you know, it's like the TV stations kind of thing. Because of course, a TV station can have them here. Things like that. We see footage from them on a regular basis. My own hotel has been filmed by them. It's not that there are no drones. It's that they are few and far between. And most of the ones that are here have been smuggled in. So it's every step of the process after, you know, so it's a very discreet question. Are they legal? No. Is there an exception for me? No. That's it. It's black and white. There is no further discussion. Asking more questions means you're not listening. That is the concrete what is allowed. No question as to what's allowed. What can you get away with is a completely different thing. You take a risk of it being confiscated. If you get into the country and they catch you with a drone, you're taking your chances, right? It could just be confiscated, but at that point, you have smuggled goods. When you get caught at the border, you're in kind of a gray area where, and someone mentioned, well, if I get caught, I'll just turn around and say I don't want to come in. It doesn't work that way. Maybe they'll let you go. They can if they want to, but they certainly don't have to, because at the time that you get caught with a drone, is at customs. That means you're past border control. You are now inside the country, and anything you are caught with at that point is contraband. You are not normally, even when you don't have contraband, allowed to simply leave the middle of border control and head back the other way. Once you're in that position, once you cross that barrier where you go past the border control officer and you're into the secure zone, you're not generally permitted to do a hairpin and just walk back out the door and head back to Costa Rica, which is where most people are trying to come in from, or back to Honduras. Those are the only, or back to your airplane. Right? Generally, you are stuck at that point. And if you try to do that, you are much more likely to get stopped and searched, I think, than if you just went through and acted casually going through customs, because you're making a very big point that you are now in a position where you're obviously thinking you're going to get caught, or did get caught, and being like, oh, I got caught. I just want to, maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe you can make that excuse. Look, I didn't know. Can I just go back? I'm sorry. Maybe, right? But don't do it thinking that you absolutely can. They absolutely have the right to confiscate your stuff and even arrest you at that point. I don't think they would ever arrest you, but they have that right to do so at that moment, right? If this was the United States and you were bringing in something that was not allowed in the same way and you got to customs and you didn't declare it, they absolutely have the right to detain and arrest you. They often won't. They do from time to time. Now, of course, you're bringing in something like drugs, you're definitely going to be right, but assuming it's something else, undeclared goods that need to be declared that are obviously being brought in, not like I have a snack in my pocket and I didn't think about it. Like this is, smuggling. So there's a real chance that you're going to get in a bit of trouble, but chances are it's only going to be confiscated. But a lot of people who just want to be like, take your chances. They think it's funny to get people arrested or to get them in trouble or to get this stuff confiscated. Be aware, you do not have the right to just leave that line and walk back out. You can get lucky, but it's them permitting you, not something you have the right to do, because you are inside Nicaragua, you are under their laws at that time. Okay, so a lot of people take their chances, and a number of people get through. A number of people get them confiscated. People lose their drones all the time. But people also get in fairly regularly with drones. But most of them then decide not to fly them because the chances of getting caught is really high. Since no drones are allowed, any drone seen in the sky is really obvious and everybody notices. And there's a lot of police in this country. And while you don't see them on the street because they don't go around patrolling, it only takes one in a neighborhood to look up in the sky and go, there's a drone flying around. I was not told about this. I'm pretty safely going to bet it's not legal. So the risk when you have a drone in the country is, of course, yes, they may just confiscate it then, but you also have the risk that you are now a person inside the country committing a crime. They don't know how you got that drone, but they do know you have contraband. So at this point, you could be facing arrest. Again, it's not something we would expect them to do, but if it was the US, you certainly would. You would expect a very dangerous confrontation with the police potentially, and you don't want to do that. Now here, obviously, the police are much safer, the laws are much better, and they're much more likely to be like, okay, you're a stupid tourist, we're going to take this away, don't do that again, right? But the option, if you're belligerent or you try to act like it's yours and they don't have the right to, you could get in a lot of trouble. You don't really want to be taking that risk. Now, some people do, right? And that's their decision, right? If you want to take that risk, just do so with your eyes wide open. Don't pretend that the information on Reddit is somehow right? That these people, just take your chance. You can just turn around. You can do what you want. No, look, you're breaking the law and there's consequences if you get caught. It is what it is, right? Like, it's not a big deal. You can't have a drone here. No one can have a drone here. It's not like you're being singled out. It's really unfortunate if you're traveling through the region and you want to have a drone and you're going from place to place and Nicaragua's in the middle of your travel plans and it causes a problem. Trust me, I know. I want a drone when I go to Honduras. I want a drone when I go to Costa Rica, and I wish I could keep it in Nicaragua and just drive over the border with it. It would make my life so easy. I could be flying in these other countries all the time, even if I'm not flying in Nicaragua, but I can't do that. Even just transporting and storing one here, well, in theory, I could maybe get a license to do that. It would be a huge pain. I just do without, right? And if you live in this region and you want to film in other places, right, I'm seriously considering staging a drone in Costa Rica, because we often use either the road there to head somewhere, like Costa Rica or Panama, or we're heading to the airports there, Liberia, San Jose, or I believe it's Tuncancan. That's Honduras. The one in PTY in Panama City. And so I could pick it up in a tiny little storage spot and have my drone and just keep it in Costa Rica. Like, I've considered doing that so that I'd have the flexible option of having one and not having to bring it in and out of Nicaragua. That's the kind of things we have to consider. But that is potentially doable. Those are the things that you may run into. So just be aware. Be aware, there's absolutely no excuse for bringing it over the border. There's no excuse if you get caught with one, but some people do, and some people get away with it. Some people shove it down their pants and just, you know, they have a small drone and no one notices them walking funny and they get through. And then if you're in a really remote area and there's no one around and you want to fly it and get some pictures of beaches or trees, well, there you go. Like, you're probably going to be okay. But certainly be aware, you're breaking the law the whole time you're operating it. You're at risk of getting caught. If you make anybody angry, if you have neighbors, if you have another tourist who didn't get to bring theirs in, anyone can blow the whistle on you. That's not something you want. So just be cognizant of what is allowed, of what the risks are, and evaluate what makes sense for you. No one's going to, you know, disappear you because you had a drone. It's not like that. Like, this is a very reasonable country. It is a very safe country, but breaking the law is still breaking the law. I encourage you not to, but if you decide to do so, just do so realistically and know what you're getting yourself into. So let's talk about the crazy thing we saw on Reddit now. This is worth talking about because someone wanted to come up with why they don't allow drones. The reason why they don't allow drones is pretty straightforward, and no one should have to be guessing at this. Like, this is really obvious, and there's no reason to be wondering why they don't allow drones. I've had a lot of problems with the GoPro over the last week, and today it completely lost all of the remaining footage that I did with all the explanation about drones. It also then, while I was recording this, just shut off on me in the middle of me talking. So I have no idea what's going on. It's certainly causing a lot of problems, and I don't trust it, so I've got double microphones on, so I'm backing up everything that I'm doing with the Rode 2. And if you hear a whining in the background, my dog hates when I talk inside. She hates it when I talk outside, but when I'm inside doing these recordings, she really hates it. And so she is just outside the door, whining at the door because she wants to come in, but if she comes in, she's going to be jumping on me and upset that I'm talking in this small room. So there's no good answer for her. So she just needs to wait out there, but you may hear her from time to time. So beyond the frustration with the GoPro, why aren't drones allowed in Nicaragua? This is not as crazy as it seems. Basically, there's two main points. One, let's start there with it requires a lot of regulations. And even in the United States, for example, where drones are generally allowed, there's a lot of licensure and police have to do a lot to monitor, and the FAA has a lot of rules and regulations, and there's just a lot that goes into it. The U.S. has a lot of resources to throw at those kinds of things, right? If you wanted to assign 100 people to go look into, you know, safety around drones or safety around drones with air traffic, or how it interplays with military, or how it's going to play into local laws, or who knows, right? Like, you can assign 100 people to do those things, and that percentage of your overall government would not represent a single person in Nicaragua. The size of the country is just that much smaller. The scale of everything is so much smaller. You don't have the ability to just have a position who spends all their time thinking about drones, let alone a giant department with people talking to each other and all these resources to come up with ideas about how to regulate it or monitor it or keep it safe or whatever, or to just make rules about it. So that's one piece. Nicaragua just needs time to put together a game plan about drones, and I suspect and I hope that they will, but it's not something we have today, and it's not a high priority. There's also not a huge need for drones here. The other piece is that Nicaragua is a very small country from a population standpoint, from a geographic standpoint, and places like the United States are very large. That means that in the United States, the ability for other countries to, we'll say, mess with them by bringing in drones and doing things with them that may not be terribly harmful but could be annoying or problematic or cause a strain on financial resources is very difficult. But the ability of a large country like the United States to do the same thing to Nicaragua is very, very easy. In one case, it would require a crippling percentage of the budget of Nicaragua be spent on drones to have any impact in the United States whatsoever. But the United States could have a crippling impact on Nicaragua by just flying drones into all kinds of things, hovering them above the airport, putting them into military installations and making people need to remove them or do something. And they could do it without a budget item being large enough to even show up on any budget. That difference in finances and population and geographic area is so dramatic, it's hard to explain just how dramatically different in size the two countries are. And when you have countries that kind of would mess with each other, like It is just, it's a nonstop thing, right? If the US has an opportunity to mess with Nicaragua, it generally does. So that they would use drones or other aspects as ways to do that if the opportunity arose, they will easily do so. It's not a far-fetched thing. It is the assumption, right? So a lot of these things have to be regulated, and sometimes they take a while to really think through and come up with a good game plan. And cameras are a great example that there was a moment where they used to regulate them a little. Then there was a moment where they said, I think we need to regulate them a lot. And then they immediately said, well, we've done enough with them. We know we no longer need to regulate them. Just let it be. And so things evolve. And that's true everywhere. But here they tend to evolve more dramatically and quickly simply because there's less bureaucracy. The government is very small, so things can happen quickly. In the United States, it is unlikely for a new law to come into place, be rejected, and have a replacement law within the span of 72 hours. It would be almost impossible. The wheels of government simply don't move that quickly. There's too many people who need to approve any given piece of paper, even if there's no objections to it. If you had all parties agreeing, but it wasn't the most critical thing in the world, it would probably take a year or two just to go through the proper channels. Here in Nicaragua, those proper channels are very short, and something that is equally complicated might pass through in just a day or two because there aren't a lot of people pushing that paper around. So just the nature of size means that things act a bit differently there, so that's why you see that effect. So because of that, we don't have drones here yet. But there's a lot more that we got to talk about because this story is fantastic. So I got this from Reddit, and it's not the first time that I've heard this. But explaining this is a little bit crazy. It's so crazy, but it makes a great story. So I'm glad I get to bring it to you. And I think we're going to find this entertaining. So stick with me. This is insane, but I have to walk you through the parts. Okay, so the claim from Reddit is that the reasons I gave for why there are no drones is not true. The claim from Reddit is that, in fact, the real reason that drones are restricted in Nicaragua is not because of its military use or its financial use or how it could affect tourism or anything like that, but instead that a corrupt government is actually limiting the accessibility of drones in order for, and this gets better and better, in order for family members of the government to have exclusive monopolistic rights to operate highly lucrative wedding photography businesses. Let's back this up. Let's say this again, because I think if you've lived anywhere and had any exposure to these things, it will blow your mind. The government is willing to risk outcry, overthrow, international condemnation in order to get a few drones limited into the hands of some family members so they can run a wedding photography business unencumbered by competition. What? Okay, so let's break this down. First of all, this makes no sense. Just at the highest government level, it makes no sense for any government anywhere in the world to do something so asinine. That's bizarre. Now, I realize in the United States, this is where these things come from. In the US, we're used to a level of corruption and a level of bureaucracy and a level of crazy in the government that sometimes some really wacky things happen and come out, and sometimes it's just stories. There's a lot of conspiracy theories, and the US is very permissive of conspiracy theories to keep moving around. The whole freedom of speech thing is often, misconferred as the freedom of dishonesty, and that's just kind of how it works. So a lot of these stories get repeated over and over again, no matter how obviously lies they are. Let's start with that. But so there's a huge risk and a huge cost to the government to restrict drones in this way. If they were to allow drones, they would have more tourism. They would have to have fewer people regulating drones. They could tax drones if they wanted to and earn quite a bit of money. Not billions of dollars, but a large sum of money could be made by taxing the sale of drones and drone equipment. So there's a lot of revenue being given up, first of all. So there's a huge loss of money to make this true. And that's real, right? We know that that is real. We also know that the people in question in the government are quite wealthy. We're not talking about pencil-pushing bureaucrats who have low incomes and just are doing this on the side. These are very rich people in general. So the people in question are very wealthy. These are very specific people that people are making these accusations about. And I'm not saying that they're trillionaires or anything of that nature. They are very wealthy. Wealthy to the point where they have a lot of businesses and investments and opportunities to make real money. The idea that they would need to use government connections to operate something anything short of, maybe mining operations or a new airlines, those kinds of things, yes, it would make sense if someone said, oh, they use government connections to come up with this giant industry. Sure, that could financially make some logical sense, but to do it to form a wedding photography business is very strange. The next piece is wedding photographers don't make a lot of money. Now, if you're really, really good and you're in Beverly Hills, you can do decently well. But in general, wedding photography is a very competitive business with a lot of people who want to do it and not that many weddings to film. And all of them fall on the same days. So even though there are lots of people without a lot of work, they're all overlapping on the days that they need to do it. Even if you had 500 weddings, you can at most do maybe 50 of them because they all overlap at the same time. So you're struggling to find ways to get more clients that don't all go at the same time. It's a tough business, right? And that's in places like the United States or India, where weddings are big business and people really put a lot of money into them. Here in Nicaragua, there's a whole bunch of factors around weddings that maybe people who are making up these stories in the United States don't realize just how crazy this is. But we got to break it down a little bit of Nicaraguan culture. First of all, in Nicaragua, broadly, the concept of marriage doesn't exist. Literally, marriage as you know it in most countries broadly doesn't exist in Nicaragua. Everyone knows someone who is married. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that most people don't recognize that as a standard institution, to the point where the standard Spanish words for marriage don't mean the same things here. They mean something much more like long-term, steady boyfriend or girlfriend rather than married couple. Even the language is different. So if you hear people talking about it, you say, well, I know people who are married there. Chances are you don't, or you only know them married in the Nicaraguan context. I know people who have met someone on a Saturday and by Sunday referred to them as their husband, and within a few weeks were no longer together. They don't have divorce here because there's no marriage ceremony. It's just someone that you're maybe living with, and people will move in after 1 or 2 days. So the entire world of marriage, as North Americans tend to think of it, broadly isn't here. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist at all. It certainly does, and I will be attending a wedding here, a full-blown, all-out wedding next month. It does exist. But in all the time we've been here, we know of very few, and they tend to be very casual. So those people who do choose to get married, first of all, so the average person, the average married couple isn't actually married, and way above 50%. So whatever population you're thinking is having weddings, you got to shrink that way down. Very few people are actually getting married. Then, of those people who are married, very few of them have a wedding. They may have a ceremony of some sort, like some dinner with family or whatever, but those who are actually throwing a wedding, very rare. So we're getting to a very small percentage of the population by the time we did those two things. Then, of people who are doing weddings here, weddings are not a big formal affair the way that they are in the United States. The idea that when you do have a wedding, you're going to spend all this money and it's going to be this big, all-out crazy thing is not at all what is going on. The weddings here tend to be very inexpensive and very casual. They don't have bands playing. They don't have big, elaborate setups. It's not like that. You go to a town and you have a place where they set up tables and people have dinner, and you certainly bring enough gifts to offset the cost of dinner, and people do a little bit of dancing, and the whole thing is very low key. Nothing like you're used to in the United States. There aren't people spending all that amount of money, and I've never been to one where they had a photographer. I know that wedding photographers do exist here. I do know it's an industry. I do know there are some people who work at it. Everyone I know who works at it, to the best of my knowledge, is relatively poor. So there's all these pieces, right? There's extremely few weddings in this country. Very few of them would ever even have a photographer. And of those, the people who would pay for a photographer and pay extra, because it would have to be extra for it to make sense, to get someone with a drone gets down to, you're talking about just a handful of weddings per year at best. There's no way this makes financial sense to even bother being a wedding photographer if you have any amount of income from somewhere else. This is not something that's lucrative in any way. It doesn't matter how much of a lock you have in the market. If you're the only person in the country who has a camera, you still can't make very much money doing wedding photography, let alone just a drone. Who even cares? Because no one has drones. No one stops and thinks about them. You know what we need for a wedding? A drone. That's not really the conversation that people are having. That's the least of their worries, because barely anyone is getting photographs, let alone video, let alone, oh, let's fly around and make the wedding potentially get raided by the police. Like, there's just way too much go wrong. It makes no sense. Now, all that said, it's already crazy, right? Every single one of those steps makes the concept crazy. And I shouldn't even have to explain this. Once I said they're using government connections to create a global or a nationwide monopoly so they can run a lucrative wedding photography business, nobody should be at any moment be like, oh, that's sensible. No, it's not. That's nuts. But all that said, we talked earlier, there are still people who smuggle in drones. It's just that they're not supposed to. The country actually does have drones. I'm not saying it has a lot of them. It certainly does not. But drones are out there, and some of them are in the hands, believe it or not, of wedding photographers. But even more so, I believe they're in the hands of real estate agents. You will often, quite often, see homes that are being filmed with drones. Clearly at times where no one's around and they're trying to be very discreet, because obviously they're not allowed to have those drones, but they're not allowed to have them that they don't bother putting the footage up online. It's pretty easy to figure out who had the drone if the government was super worried about it. Tracking them down and confiscating the drone wouldn't be that hard. So people do have them. If you're going to have a wedding and you really want to have a drone, you can probably make it happen without too much of an ordeal. Yes, it's illegal. Yes, you could get caught. No, you probably won't. And no, you will not pay an arm and a leg for it. Maybe. Maybe you're going to spend an extra $100 or $200 to be able to bring in someone who has a drone and film that in the wedding. That would be outrageously expensive and very hard to believe that anybody would pay that much extra to get that. But just hypothesizing, maybe there's that little bit extra that you would have to pay, because the person with a drone is taking on a huge risk, and that drone, even if it never gets confiscated, will eventually wear out, and the parts for it or the replacement drone could get confiscated. The average cost of owning a drone here is at least double what it is somewhere else, because every so often they get confiscated and getting parts is nearly impossible. And if you get one repaired, they can't get it back to you. So it's not a problem that you can't get drones at all. It's that by the time you get to use one, someone has had to absorb that risk over a number of people, and it's a little bit more costly. That's fine. But the point is that the idea that a monopoly has been created through this system of things, even though the entire system doesn't make sense, and if they really wanted to make money, they would just collect taxes on drones and make billions instead of tens of thousands, not really billions, but they could make hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes on drones, and at best a wedding studio that actually did have a monopoly, and none exist, this is not true, but if there was one, at best it could make maybe $10,000 extra, which is a lot of money here, but not to the kind of people we're talking about. That's an amount of money you might spend on dinner, not an amount of money you spend on your super lucrative wedding photography business. So none of these pieces fit together, yet these are the stories that get told, and we hear this kind of stuff on a regular basis here, and it just blows our minds the way that people think about Nicaragua. Like, in one breath they're willing to be like, super corrupt, has no money, and you know, nothing actually functions, and in the next breath there's so many millionaires that want to throw big shindig weddings that they're willing to have an entire industry making people millionaires based off of drone wedding footage. None of this, even within the story itself, doesn't add up, even if you know nothing about the location. You shouldn't have to say which country it is. In no country would this story make sense. Nobody can have a population where you can't get a drone, you can have this type of corruption, you're not collecting taxes, and you're making money off of wedding photography. None of it makes sense. So that kind of stuff, be on the lookout, because it never ends here. These wild stories of crazy things that no one is thinking through are constantly being repeated. And this was presented to me as just obviously this is why there are no drones in the country, like it was some foregone conclusion that the reason drones wouldn't be allowed is so that it could be a monopoly on wedding photography. I definitely know wedding photographers who have drones and they're not rich, right? So it's not working out as planned. All of this is stuff you can easily observe and go. If you'd like to help support the channel and help me pay for not being able to have a drone, but lead me in the right direction, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ScottAllenMiller. And of course, I need some budget for new GoPros because this is not working and it's driving me crazy. If you'd like any tours or a chance to talk on the phone and do a consultation on what it takes to move to Nicaragua or whatever, send us an email, info@relocatenicaragua.com. As always, share on social media, tell your friends about the show. Pray for me as I try to record in Managua tomorrow, where my audio cutting out will be a really big problem that I don't have an easy way to re-record. And I will see all of you tomorrow.